All right, ladies and gentlemen, and here we are in the last of our lecture series on colonial societies in the New World. This is British North America Part 2. Here we're going to look at the northern colonies, the New England colonies, and the Mid-Atlantic. Uh, we discussed this a little bit when we looked at the Reformation earlier in the year. Um, the One of the overwhelming reasons why there is a religious ideology behind the settlement of the New England colonies goes back to the Reformation era problems within the Church of England. And remember, the Church of England was a kind of a compromised church established by Elizabeth I in the Elizabethan settlement. And there were those in the church who supported the hierarchy of the church, the bishops of the church, the royal establishment of the church. And then there were those who wanted it to be a um, much more Protestant style church. And they were typically called Puritans because they wanted to purify um, the Church of England from any residual Catholic practice that was sort of embedded in that hierarchical royal church. The Pilgrims who landed at Plymouth in 1620 tended to be separatists. That means that they were Protestant members of the Church of England who initially had wanted to reform the Church of England, but kind of gave up on that idea and said, no, no, we need just to go form our own churches that are governed by the local congregation. The Church of England is beyond the pale. It's beyond reform. And so we'll just establish our own local congregations. Some of these adopted the Congregationalist model. Some of them liked the model that was used in the Church of Scotland, a Presbyterian model, and so that's what these separatists tended to do. Other Puritans who were funded by the joint stock company, the Massachusetts Bay Company, followed later on, and they tended to be non-separatists. They tended to want to change the Church of England from within along the lines of a Presbyterian model. Um, so they were only kind of still nominally in touch with the leadership of the Church of England, and eventually those contacts were broken by the time they got to the New World. They established essentially their own church in the New World. One big difference that we see with the southern colonies tend to be mostly men coming to the south looking to make fortunes and so forth. Because of the religious nature of the New England colonies, families tended to immigrate to Massachusetts Bay, and so there was tended to be a more normal gender balance of the population. Um, that becomes a problem in the South, where there is an imbalance between men and women, and far fewer women. There'll actually be rebellions as a result of all these unmarried guys running around, disgruntled and unhappy about society and so forth. Um, but it also creates a very stable population in New England, and the population of New England, as a result, grows pretty rapidly, despite the very rocky start in the 1620s and 30s, the cold, the famines, and so forth. And also in contrast to the southern colonies, the population in the north tended to be very, very homogenous. There was not that kind of that aristocratic class did not emerge as quickly. Certainly there were elites, there were wealthy folks, there were poorer folks, but nothing near the growing gap between the kind of planter aristocracy and everyone else that we see, let's say, in a South Carolina colony. And here we have a map of Massachusetts Bay Colony as of around 1670 or so. The climate in the north was not very good for cash crops. Uh, Tobacco certainly couldn't be grown that far north. Rice, indigo, cotton, nothing like that. So the economy was much more diverse, and in that sense also much more resilient. People looked to a diversified economy that included fur trapping, harvesting timber, fishing, lots of things that tended to revolve around shipping. And so the northern colonies then tended to be sort of the areas where the shipping magnates come from, and then the agriculture in the south um, will then be shipped by these northern merchants to the New World, and then also try to trade within other parts of to the Old World, to Europe, and then even managing the shipping within the New World. Okay, managing the shipping between various English North American colonies and the Dutch colonies, and even trying to get into the Spanish colonies, which was a much more difficult task. The British early on had an official policy of mercantilism, which said that the economy would be tightly controlled, but the British never really followed up on that. So there was virtually no government interference among the New England merchants, giving them maximum flexibility to be profitable. In contrast to what we see in the Spanish New World. So by 1740, Boston had a population of 16,000. Now that's about 120 years of development, but that's pretty significant when we think in the first roughly 70 or 80 years, all of New France only had a population of about 7,000. Okay? So it gives you a sense of how rapidly British North America grows. New York will also develop quite rapidly, but New York is not established by the English. It is established as a Dutch colony. It was established during the heyday of the Dutch uh, Republic and the Dutch Republic's empire overseas. By 1624, they had recently seized all of Indonesia, including Malacca, from the Portuguese. They had actually started to take over Brazil. For a time, much of Brazil was actually controlled by the Dutch. And they decided that they also wanted to get into the North American game as well. They wanted to be major uh, economic players in the North American continent. And so, at a very wonderfully strategic location, at a interesting, great port on the east coast of North America, they established New Amsterdam. This colony, however, was not well defended, despite its uh, fort and the wall that ran along the southern tip of what is Manhattan Island. We know where that wall is because there was a street that ran along the wall. When the wall was torn down, the street remained, and of course we know it today as Wall Street. The Dutch merchants in New York, or I should say in New Amsterdam, had no intention to fight the British because it was just not profitable to fight wars. And much to the chagrin of the colonial governor, the Dutch colonial governor, the merchants basically said, nope, we will fully embrace the English if it means we can keep on making money. Not much has changed in New York since the 17th century. It develops as a very important commercial and shipping center. It serves as the linchpin between the New England colonies and the southern colonies. The control of the Hudson River Valley was so important. So much grain came out of the Hudson Valley down into the port of New York. The other Dutch colony that was there, part of New Amsterdam, was northern New Jersey. And that was a genuine breadbasket as well. That's also taken over by the English at the same time. And so the sort of the core of the British Mid-Atlantic hinges on New York and really helps unite all of these British colonial settlements. And here we can see New York in around 1674. This is after the handover from the Dutch. You actually see this is a Dutch drawing. In Dutch, Nieuw Amsterdam, right? It was renamed in honor of the king's brother, the Duke of York. The other major mid-Atlantic colony was Pennsylvania. This was established by William Penn, who was granted a royal charter in 1682. so that there could be a place in which Quakers, who were a dissenting group, religious group in Britain, could find religious freedom. This colony also, not just because of Quakers moving there, but just because of its strategic location, grew very, very rapidly, reaching about 20,000 by 1700. That's amazing, right? 1682 to 1700, a growth of 20,000 inhabitants. Remember, in 1684, the population of all of New France was only 7,000. Philadelphia would grow so rapidly that very quickly it would actually surpass Boston as the largest city in the British North American colonies. Um, Philadelphia becomes important because it accesses the agricultural land, the agricultural hinterland of Pennsylvania, that great black earth region that stretches out beyond Philadelphia all the way out to what is modern day Lancaster. This is some of the best farmland in North America. Wheat production done on small farms made the colony actually a rival to South Carolina for agricultural production. Of course, very different types of produce. Wheat in Pennsylvania versus cash crops in the southern colonies. In Pennsylvania, as well as in much of the North, slavery was not typical. Not typical on small farms. It just wasn't worth it. You didn't have the kind of intensive farming that was required by most cash crops. Rice has to be replanted in some cases. Sugar in the Caribbean is a crop that has a very long growing season and is very, very difficult to harvest. So you need really intensive labor. This is not the case with wheat. And so small farms did not utilize slavery. However, wealthy urban dwellers did in fact own slaves as domestic servants. So there will be slavery that will spread across the mid-Atlantic and the northern colonies, but they will tend to be household domestic slaves rather than agricultural outdoor laborers. And so we can look at British North America, and here we are, the three, we could even say four great regions, but really the South in purple and in green, the Mid-Atlantic in pink, and the New England colonies, the Dominion of New England in yellow. I mentioned before, another aspect that's always covered in sort of early American colonial history is also in terms of looking at the religious composition. The New England colonies tended to be very kind of Puritan Calvinist. The southern colonies tended to be very Church of England, very aristocratic, very traditional, very royal. The Mid-Atlantic was much more mixed. New York was kind of Church of England and Dutch Reformed because of the Dutch influence, as was northern New Jersey. Scottish Presbyterianism became very popular in New Jersey as a lot of Scots settled in the New Jersey region. Pennsylvania tended to be more Quakers, and with an influx of German immigrants in that area, also Lutheran and some Moravians as well. So the Mid-Atlantic was the most kind of culturally diverse, religiously mixed region. Of course, all of these are Protestant groups, so how diverse is that? Only Maryland was a colony that was established for the protection of Catholic minorities coming from England, established by Lord Baltimore, who was himself Catholic. But eventually, even the tolerance of Catholics was kind of revoked in Maryland during the colonial period until the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights establishing freedom of religion are enshrined in the U.S. Constitution, the non-establishment clause in the Bill of Rights. So anyway, here's our view of the British North American Empire, and we will of course revisit this at least once more when we talk about that fatal mistake of those colonists rebelling against the British, alas. But until that time, thank you for listening.